Friends, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. The former CIA officer, John Kiriakou, was giving a talk, and at the end of his talk during the Q&A session, he was asked about Chas Freeman. This former CIA officer, John Kiriakou, he said that in his career, he had the pleasure of working with some of the greatest diplomats. And he said that Chas Freeman was one of those great diplomats. In John Kiriakou's words, he referred to Chas Freeman as a giant in the field of diplomacy, an honest giant, he said. And Chas Freeman is my guest today. Mr. Freeman has spent his career in service of the United States of America. Throughout his career, he's held many different positions. Some of his positions have included, he's been the United States ambassador to Saudi Arabia. He was also the Assistant Secretary of Defense. Also, in 1972, when President Richard Nixon took his historic trip to China, Ambassador Chas Freeman was the chief translator at that time. So for me, it is always an honor to introduce and to speak with Ambassador Freeman. Ambassador, welcome. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Well, thank you, Amr. It's nice to be with you. I didn't pay John Kiriakou to say those nice things, but he was part of the establishment at my embassy in Riyadh. And of course, he's distinguished himself with his own honesty and fearlessness in revealing things that needed to be revealed, but which have been concealed. So I have great respect for him. And I'm glad to hear that he doesn't think I'm so bad either.
So, Ambassador, before we started the live stream just now, you were mentioning to me that how, in your view, you think that this conflict with Iran is going to continue to escalate. Why did you say that?
Well, the basic structure of this war, which was started at the instance of Benjamin Netanyahu, authorized by him, not by the U.S. Congress, which has no clear objectives on the part of the United States, does have very clear objectives for Israel, which are the Israeli objective is the annihilation of the state of Iran, the dissolution of that state if possible, but the reduction of that state to impotence, and therefore no impediment to the establishment of greater Israel, a vision of Israel that extends from the Euphrates River in Iraq to include Lebanon, Syria, parts of Saudi Arabia, and parts of Egypt up to the Nile. This is a vision which is rooted in an alleged promise by God to Abraham that his descendants would occupy this space. Of course, Abraham had several children, not just Isaac, the progenitor of the legendary mythical progenitor of the Jews, but also Ismail, the father of the Arabs, and others, other children by concubines. So this is a rather strange vision, but it's one that is very firmly held by religious Zionists. Israel also wants to disempower the Gulf Arabs, whose influence and prestige contradicts their own influence and prestige to some extent. The United States doesn't share these objectives, although President Trump clearly initiated this war with a call for regime change, a change of government, a change of governmental system in Iran. He did not call for, and he did not want the dissolution of the Iranian state. The objectives he put forward were multiple, and we can talk about those, but they were quite different from the Israeli objectives. Iran's objectives have been very clear. Iran, for many years, has been in a defensive posture under attack by Israel in a low-intensity conflict characterized largely by Israeli assassinations of Iranian scientists and political leaders, but also more recently by attacks. For example, the murder of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, during the presidential inauguration of President Pezeshkian, the current Iranian president, and of course, the June war of last year, so-called 12-day war, which was finally joined by the United States. Iran's objectives are, now that it has been faced with an existential challenge from Israel, to pose a comparable challenge to Israel's existence, and also to remove the American bases in the Gulf that have threatened it and that have been used as part of the attacks on it. In these bases or anchorages exist in Kuwait, in Bahrain, where the Fifth Fleet is headquartered, in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates, and even in Oman, a nominally neutral party, but a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Iran's method of getting rid of the US bases is to make it clear to the countries harboring them that they do so at their own risk, and that that risk is unacceptably large. In other words, the American bases, which they regarded as part of their defense, in fact, attract attack, make them vulnerable rather than defend them. And therefore, they should reconsider the presence of those bases and realign themselves appropriately. This is a battle that's going on basically between Israel and Iran. It shows no sign of ending. Iran has followed a very careful campaign plan, which I have likened to the strategy of the late great boxer Muhammad Ali, who invented something called rope-a-dope. In other words, accept all the punishment you can take from your opponent in order to wear out your opponent to the point when you can deliver a knockout blow. Iran is now on the verge of attempting such a knockout blow. It has essentially exhausted Israel's ability to intercept its missiles. It has also depleted the American capacity in that regard. It has been the subject of, or I should say, the object of very, very heavy Israeli and American attacks, which have damaged its infrastructure and done great harm to its population and its urban areas. But it remains intact. And it had concealed its most potent missiles in reserve underground for this moment when Israel was rendered vulnerable to them. It's very hard, and I'll just close by saying it's very hard to evaluate the exact balance between Iran and Israel because of Israeli military censorship. Iran has allowed journalists in, and we've seen reporting from Iran. Apparently, and some 80,000 targets in Iran have been destroyed or attacked. But we have not been able to see the damage that Iran has been doing in Israel, which is, however, substantial. And Iran has just signaled Israel that even more damage could follow, and maybe will, by firing a missile at the Dimona Nuclear Research Center, which is the heart of the Israeli nuclear weapons program, and firing to show that it can get through the Israeli defenses. That is the most heavily defended point in Israel. It was able to strike next to the reactor and thus demonstrate that if it wanted to, it could strike the reactor. We better hope that does not happen, because if it does, there's going to be a cloud of radioactivity that covers much of Israel and even drifts into the air of Egypt. So I'll stop here, but I think the battle is in progress. It is nowhere near an end. Iran has plenty of additional leverage to use, and we can talk about that if you want.
I've heard you and others say that Israel is purposefully murdering moderates in Iran as a way to basically keep this war going. Why would Israel want to do that when, as you just mentioned, Iran is depleting their air defense supplies?
Well, because Israel hopes that it can win this war with American help. It has been guilty, by the way, of quite a number of false flag operations, one of which may be, I mean, we don't really know, the apparent firing of ballistic missiles at the joint American-British base in Diego Garcia. And they didn't reach Diego Garcia, but the Iranians claim they didn't do this. There's some reason to believe they were fired from an Israeli submarine in the Arabian Sea. But Israel is in this until the end, and so is Iran. Neither one of them is prepared to negotiate anything until they achieve more than they have done. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is beginning to realize that this was a gamble that will fail. That what will be left is an Iran that up to now, of course, had not gone nuclear, in large measure because its leader, the now slain supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, had firmly opposed any sort of weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons. He's now dead. His son has succeeded him. His son favors a nuclear arsenal, as does the Iranian establishment that remains after the Israeli decimation of them on February 28th. We also know, and I think that's why the firing of missiles at Diego Garcia is credible, that the late supreme leader opposed the development of ballistic missiles to strike the United States. And he's now dead, and those who favor that are in the ascendancy. So there's a very good chance that neither the United States nor Israel can stop this war, because Iran is determined to create a situation in which it is no longer threatened by Israel. And here I'll say, before this war, Israel was a very real threat to Iran, with assassinations, bombing, and everything else. Iran was a potential threat to Israel, not an actual one. Now it is an actual threat to Israel. We have, in this war, we have also guaranteed nuclear proliferation, not just Iran. If Iran goes nuclear, as it now will, Saudi Arabia will go nuclear, so will Turkey, so will Egypt, and farther afield, very likely Japan will reconsider its non-nuclear policy, in South Korea, which has a population that favors the development of nuclear weapons to match those of North Korea, will also go nuclear. So I don't know where this ends, but it will not end well. Regime change is out of the question. The attacks on Iran have had the entirely predictable effect that the German attacks had on Stalinist Russia. You know, the Russia or the Soviet Union under Stalin probably had a huge number of people who feared and loathed both Stalin and the system he had created. And yet, when a foreign power attacked the Soviet Union, they turned out they loved their homeland more than they hated the system imposed on it, and they rallied to its defense. And basically, the Soviet Union, more than any other country, was responsible for the defeat of Nazi Germany and the end of fascism in Europe. So the regime change is not going to happen. The state is clearly not going to collapse, contrary to Prime Minister Netanyahu's fantasies. Nuclear weapons are in the future. And of course, Iran has seized control of the Strait of Hormuz, which is the jugular vein of the global energy system. And it is basically operating a toll road there. If you reach an agreement with Iran and pay it, interestingly not in dollars, in Chinese currency, which is an ominous sign for the dollar, then you are allowed to go through without interference by Iran. Iran, of course, commands the strait because of the shore batteries that it has on the north shore of the strait, not its navy, which has largely been sunk. But China, India, Japan, Turkey, and perhaps others have all reached agreements with Iran to allow free passage. And the United States is not interfering with this, far from it. One of Iran's objectives consistently in its negotiations with the nuclear accord of 2015 and the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, has been relief from American sanctions. Well, the United States has now lifted sanctions on Iranian oil sales, and Iran is producing more oil and exporting more than it ever did. Perhaps at the end of this week, President Trump has some idea of stopping that. But if he does, the result will be to send global oil prices higher and to increase the price of gasoline at American pumps. So I don't see an easy exit from this for the United States, or an easy way to ease the pain that Iran is now in a position to inflict.
So you mentioned earlier how the Israeli and U.S. objectives for this war are different. Does the U.S. want to de-escalate at this point, and what would the path to de-escalation look like?
Well, I think our President Trump, realizes that he's walked into a trap and he's trying to get out of it. In some ways, he's making use of it. I mean, for example, he announced on Saturday that he was giving Iran 48 hours to open the Persian Gulf exit through the Strait of Hormuz, and that if it didn't, he would destroy all the power plants in Iran. Iran replied that if he did that, the strait would be closed to everyone, driving gasoline prices in the United States to record levels, and globally, of course, increasing the price of oil enormously. And they would also destroy the power plants and possibly the desalination plants of their neighbors. The countries in West Asia, the Gulf Arab countries, Israel, depend heavily on desalinated water. I think Saudi Arabia is about 70% dependent on that water. You can't live without water. Kuwait is 90% dependent on that water. Qatar, I don't know, but is also very dependent on desalinated water. So is the UAE, though less so. And so basically, Iran was threatening to destroy those societies, to depopulate those countries, to cause them to cease to exist. That may have been one of the reasons that President Trump backed off that ultimatum. And he announced, just as the ultimatum was about to run out, the deadline was about to occur, that he was suspending it for 5 days. The main purpose of that, he claimed there were talks going on with Iran. The main purpose of that, in retrospect, was to manipulate the market, capital markets. About 15 minutes before his announcement of the suspension and that there were talks going on with Iran, $2 trillion was placed in oil futures markets, betting that the price of oil would go down. I think a very substantial amount of money, numbered into billions of dollars, was placed on S&P, Standard & Poor's stock index futures. Again, somebody in the administration, somebody in the know, made a pile of money in the most corrupt manner possible. And I think that was actually the purpose. I do not believe the 5-day extension is anything other than cover for an escalation by President Trump against Iran. And to that, in that regard, there is evidence that special forces and aerial aviation equipped forces of all kinds, including the 82nd Airborne, may be in the process of being deployed to the region, perhaps with the idea of capturing Harg Island, which is the principal exit point or principal export point for Iranian oil. If that happens, I think everyone should expect quite a huge list of American casualties, and very likely the destruction of those oil facilities as they are defended, with the result that oil prices are going to go up even farther. The basic point here, I believe, is that this is not a short, victorious war of the sort that President Trump imagined. He apparently told the Turks before the February 28th surprise attack that the war would be over in 4 days, ending on Tuesday, which was Purim, the Jewish festival celebrating a past Persian leader's sparing of the Jewish population of Persia through the good offices of Esther, his wife, a Jewish lady. Anyway, I think we're in this for the long haul. And I believe that the president has told the military, our military, that the war could go on through September. So I don't know how that would happen, because we're basically running out of munitions. And the knock-on effects of this, both in the short term and long term, are large. Immediate effects include the essential stoppage of arms supplies to Ukraine. As you know, we've managed to hand the bag for Ukraine to the Europeans. They buy weapons from us and then transfer them to Ukraine. But we're not going to have this, we won't have the stocks or the production capability to sell them anything. And Ukraine is the immediate victim of this. The beneficiaries mainly seem to me to be likely to be Russia and China. Other countries, including our own, are getting hurt.
The Gulf Arab countries who are unable currently to export their oil and gas through the Persian Gulf, through the Strait of Hormuz, and these same countries who host US bases which have been attacked by Iran. The leaders of these countries, what are they thinking in this conflict? What implications does it have for the future relationship of these countries with Iran or with the United States?
Very big question that I'm sure they are very concerned with. I think there are two immediate reactions. The first one, which is a natural desire of people to exact revenge for the damage that they're taking. Of course, the wiser heads in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries understand that this war was not started by Iran. And in fact, they had spent a great deal of effort trying to persuade the United States to not launch this war. Ultimately, the responsibility for this war, accountability for it, is in the hands of Israel first and the United States second. So there is a desire for revenge, for vengeance. And in the short term, they have no alternative but to double down on their relationship with the United States. In the longer term, however, Iran cannot be eliminated as a threat to them. It certainly cannot be eliminated as a threat by the United States. In fact, it's American actions that activated that threat and might do so again. So in the long run, they face a choice. And I believe in the long run, they will choose to decouple, dissociate themselves from the American military presence in their midst, and pursue a diplomatic solution to their security. Diplomacy is, after all, a classical method, a very effective method of threat reduction. It also can be used, as the Chinese, Indians, Japanese, and Turks have shown, to solve the problem of blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. So I think there are two things there in terms of what the options for the Gulf Arabs are, and very likely the result of this war will be a greatly reduced American presence and influence in the region, perhaps suddenly, or maybe on an agreed basis progressively. Here, there is a requirement, I think, for the convening of a conference. There is one to be convened under Turkish auspices, but a more effective vehicle might be the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or for Islamic Cooperation, the former Organization of the Islamic Conference, which has 57 members, including Muslim countries outside the region that are very prestigious and have skilled diplomatic skills that are much in demand. I'm speaking of Malaysia, for example, or Indonesia. And of course, there are other factors in here. Pakistan is being driven away from Iran and closer to Saudi Arabia. And we should not forget that there is one result of the June 2025 war, the so-called 12-day war, was a defense pact between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, which basically has a sort of Article 5 NATO-style clause in it that an attack on either would be considered an attack on both. And Pakistan, therefore, is committing to Saudi Arabia, including, I think, a nuclear umbrella for Saudi Arabia, if that is required. There's a long history there, but I think that's one implication of that pact. The other is, of course, that these two countries, perhaps with partners like Egypt or Turkey, will now develop a military-industrial base, which will allow them to divorce themselves from dependence on the United States, which is the major supplier of weapons to all there. In the case of Pakistan, the weapons technology is Chinese, and basically the long-term result of what's happening could well be the loss of the American arms sales market in that region, with the exception of our donations to Israel, if those continue, and its replacement by a mixture of technologies and weapon systems obtained from countries like China, Pakistan, Russia, perhaps India. So the long-term impact is great. There's several other things that I should mention, and that is that the vulnerability of the world economy and national economies to the severance of oil supplies through the Strait of Hormuz is driving a tremendous increase in interest in renewable energy. China has been largely exempted from invidious effects, serious effects of this energy crisis, because it is so heavily reliant now on wind power, solar power, nuclear power, hydropower, which do not rely on foreign sources. But China has also been driven farther into the embrace of the Russians with a gas pipeline called the Power of Siberia, under discussion for a long time, now actually apparently going to move forward so that China imports a lot of more Russian gas and less from the Persian Gulf. Of course, one of the results of and the American and Israeli attack on gas fields or the Israeli attack, I should say, on the so-called South Pars gas field off Iran was an Iranian retaliation against the North Field, which is confusingly the southern part of that field, which is exploited by Qatar. So Qatar has lost a good deal of its natural gas production capability, and the Ministry of Energy in Qatar says that it will take 3 to 5 years to recover that. So that is an illustration of the fact that the damage that's being done now will take varying amounts of time, but considerable time to be repaired, if in fact it can be. The prospect is, in other words, that the long-term, low-intensity conflict between Israel and Iran, which has now become a high-intensity conflict, will continue at one level of intensity or another. And I think the Iranians assume that if Israel is under constant attack by their missiles, or intermittent attack, I should say, that many people in Israel with second passports will leave the country for the countries to which they are entitled to move, largely Spain and Portugal, which about 2 million Israelis have Spanish and Portuguese passports, but also to Germany and others. So Israel will be left to the religious fanatics and the unfortunate Arab Jews who had to move there after the establishment of the State of Israel because of animosity of the non-Jewish Arab, Christian, and Muslim populations toward them. Not a happy prospect for anybody, really.
Based on what you're saying, is it fair to say that this war in Iran is an inflection point in history? In other words, is it reasonable to expect that the Middle East or Western Asia will look different after this war is over than it did before this war began?
Yes, I think that is indeed the case. But the effects are broader than that. You know, by depleting our munitions, by firing off pretty much everything we have in West Asia at Iran, and of course supporting the Israeli effort to annex southern Lebanon, which is ongoing. Under the cover of this war, Israel has acted to expand its territory, not just in Syria and in Gaza, but in southern Lebanon, the bottom third of Lebanon. And we're hearing discussion in the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, about annexation of that territory. So the region will certainly be changed one way or another, either with the weakening or the strengthening of Israel, or with the continuation or the end of this fighting with a new security architecture in the Gulf, perhaps arranged under the auspices, as I suggested, of the Conference on Islamic Cooperation. But beyond that, we have depleted our arsenal. We're not in a position to defend Taiwan against China because we've moved. We were supposed to be pivoting to Asia. That was the plan. But we're now removing interceptors and other equipment and forces from Pacific Asia in order to fight in West Asia. So West Asia, or the Middle East, if you will, has once again swallowed the pivot to Asia, and I'm including in that the deployment of various marine expeditionary units, which I think may be part of a plan to occupy parts of Iran, but equally possibly are a diversion intended to conceal an airborne assault on Chargé Island or somewhere else. So I think I mentioned the drive toward renewable energy. That creates a huge new market for China. It guarantees that our American dedication to keeping the combustion engine alive is going to be outflanked by electric vehicles everywhere of Chinese design, even in Canada. So I think we're hurting ourselves. We're ceding the future technologically to China. We are, of course, Russia benefits immediately, not only from the final establishment of a gas market, larger gas market for it in China, but windfall profits from having been exempted from the sanctions, much to the distress of President Zelensky of Ukraine. Russia's going to reap a huge windfall in terms of revenue. And of course, our war in Ukraine, far from weakening and isolating it, has accomplished the opposite. Russian economy is now larger than that of Germany in purchasing power terms, and its military is outproducing all of NATO, plus Japan and South Korea, in terms of armaments production. So we have not weakened it, we have strengthened it. We have not isolated, we have reoriented it toward China, India, toward West Asia. Russian influence in West Asia is going to increase as ours is diminished. So will Chinese. And of course, I have not spoken of Africa or the implications of all of this for the Trump gloss on the Roosevelt doctrine that is domination of the Western Hemisphere by coercive means, which is going to be resisted by the countries in South America. Those in Central America and the Caribbean have suffered from it. We may see, as Donald Trump threatens, and some sort of assault on Cuba, which is starving under our pressure. We are making no friends anywhere. We are virtually isolated, not just in international organizations, but from our own allies. And that's the final point I would make. This puts the final nail in the coffin of the Atlantic Alliance. Donald Trump treated NATO as a reservoir of cannon fodder, auxiliaries to be called at will by the United States in support of American military expeditions all over the globe, something that we achieved with the NATO deployment to Afghanistan, which wasn't a success. But this time when he asked for NATO help, everyone said no. Some said hell no. It turns out that you can only abuse people so much, threatening to seize their territory, as we've done with Greenland, or to annex them as a state, as we've done with Canada, and so forth, and insulting them. And then when you do that, as Art Carnegie, the author of How to Make Friends and Influence People, could easily have foretold, when you want their help, they don't give it.
I heard you speaking about a disillusionment in Spain with NATO and some sort of movement about wanting to leave NATO. How significant is that in Spain and in the rest of Europe?
Well, I think it's very serious in Spain. Spain has distinguished itself by actually acting against the genocide in Gaza, against the facilitation of this war. It has forbidden American aircraft and naval vessels to refuel en route to the war zone, which means that we've had to shift these activities to other NATO allies. Spain is very disenchanted and alienated, and this has led to widespread popular protests, which is what you're mentioning. But it's also led the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, to take a very courageous stand on the moral issues here and in favor of international law. So the alienation between us and Spain is pretty thorough. Whether, in fact, the Spanish government will withdraw from NATO, as the protesters are demanding, and expel the American bases, as they also demand, is an open question. I think it's far too early to say. But it's clear that we have done grave damage to our reputation, not just in Spain, but elsewhere in Western Europe. And our reliability is not reinforced reputationally by our inability, our unwillingness to defend the Gulf Arabs, whom we've put in harm's way, who are suffering, who wanted our help. And we're told that, well, we don't have the supplies to replenish your arsenals, and we have to give priority to Israel over you and priority to ourselves. So this is, some allies we have proved to be people in Europe, having experienced the American decoupling from the war in Ukraine, leaving them with the responsibility for conducting it, are not impressed by our reliability. And trust is the foundation of the Atlantic Alliance. It's evaporated. So I don't know what will happen. But even in Britain, we're hearing complaints about the cost of the association with the United States and the lack of benefits from it.
I'll ask you two questions. One, will Israel annex southern Lebanon, and will it be able to hold that successfully? And my second question is, will Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, will they enter this war and shut down the Red Sea?
Well, both questions get to a perverted, a distorted view of the relationship between resistance movements or countries in the region and Iran. They are Iran-backed. They are not Iran-directed. They are not clients of Iran. They are dependencies on Iran for support for their own reasons. It's important to recognize that. Israel, which decimated the leadership of Hezbollah with its infamous use of explosive pagers, and then followed up with the murder of the leader, Nasrallah, with deep penetrator bombs that got to the bunker underneath Beirut, where he was conducting business. Imagined that it had disarmed, effectively crippled Hezbollah. That's not the case. And everyone needs to remember that Israel has repeatedly invaded southern Lebanon, and each time it has been driven out by Hezbollah. Of course, there's a campaign on in the West by the United States, understandable perhaps, to require the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah. But for Lebanon, the only effective defense is Hezbollah. And it is apparently accounting for quite a number of Israeli casualties in southern Lebanon. The Israeli effort to depopulate southern Lebanon, to clear it of human life, which parallels its approach in Gaza, may work, but it guarantees the enmity of almost all of the Lebanese and of the world at large, and I don't think it is sustainable, therefore. So I think there is an effort being prepared to annex southern Lebanon, which would, of course, be entirely contrary to international law, a war crime. Israel doesn't seem to mind committing war crimes. I don't think that is likely to succeed. The question on Yemen is different. Yemen has acted in solidarity with the Palestinians in an effort to cause Israel to pay a price for the genocide it has been committing. And when the genocide stops or subsides to a lower level, as it has not stopped, but it is continuing in a less visible manner in Gaza, Yemen has been prepared to stand down. Yemen pioneered the strategy that Iran is now applying to the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, namely a land-based sea blockade, something no one had done before. All of this is a reminder of the importance of strategic lines of communication and the bottlenecks in them. A reminder of the Dardanelles, the exit from the Black Sea, of the Suez Canal and the Bab el-Mandeb in the Red Sea, and of course, Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. Whether the Yemenis would come back in or not will be a decision for them to make. And I don't think Iran can direct them to do that. So a good deal of what will happen there depends on something that everyone's not paying attention to, which is the great escalation by Israel, not only of war against its neighbors in Syria and Lebanon, but and the continuation of the genocide in Gaza, but its effort at ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, which is accompanied by violent pogroms, the burning of houses, the murder of people by settlers and by the Israeli military who backed the settlers' depredations. This can have an effect on Yemen because Yemen has the distinction of being the only country that has honored its obligations under the Convention Against Genocide, which call for positive action by all countries to halt any effort at genocide. Yemen has done that. The West has been complicit in the genocide, and Europe is complicit in the American assault on Iran, because that assault could not occur if others in Europe followed the Spanish example and impeded the logistical support for it that bases in Europe, American bases in Europe, provide. So to go back to your main question, what I think is the main question, is this a turning point in history? Is this an epochal change? I think it is, both on the regional level. We don't know what will emerge from the rubble in Iran or Israel, and the collateral damage to other countries, including Lebanon. But the United States is being greatly weakened militarily. We have been greatly weakened reputationally. We have a reputation now for irrationality, erratic behavior, policy chaos in Washington, inconstancy, unreliability, and our military are seeing the use of force by them discounted, devalued because of its inability to accomplish objectives, which frankly were never achievable by the use of force. You can't change a regime from the air. We tried to do that with Nazi Germany in World War II, with Japan, with heavy bombing, and we tried to do that with North Vietnam. None of it worked. It's not working in Iran. You can't convince someone through maximum pressure not to develop the capacity to defend themselves. We have the example of North Korea, where maximum pressure, inflexible demands by the United States, infeasible demands by the United States, disrespect for the regime in Pyongyang, which it perhaps deserves, have all combined to create a North Korean capability to strike the United States with nuclear warheads. That would never have come into being had diplomacy been given fair play rather than maximum pressure, which is the policy we've allowed to Iran. And I suspect Iran is now going to follow the North Korean example, as I suggested. This is a change in the world order. This is a change away from the Pax Americana. Very few people want to be associated with the United States now. And it is certainly a change in the regional order. And it has ripple effects as far away as South America and, of course, Pacific Asia.
I'll ask one, maybe two more questions, and then Ambassador, I'll give you the floor for any closing words you want to leave our audience with. It wasn't that long ago that President Trump was demanding a complete and unconditional surrender of Iran. Meanwhile, what Iran is demanding is a few things. They want an end to the sanctions on Iran. They want an end to Israel's attacks on Iran, and they want U.S. to they want the U.S. to leave its military bases in the Middle East or Western Asia. How do these two sides come to terms? Or in other words, how is this war likely to end?
Well, one of the unfortunate things that's happened in this war is that, like the war in Ukraine, the diplomacy that has been nominally organized to address it is amateurish, ill-informed, unprofessional, and ineffective. And basically, Iran, like the Russians, has concluded that there's no point in negotiating with the United States. You should keep the door open. You should listen to the Americans. But the only way you can end the war that you've embarked upon or have been forced into is on the ground. The battlefield will decide the outcome. That is where both Israel and Iran are now. And here I just want to say, as I mentioned, that the implication or the claim that there was an active negotiation going on with Iran was used to manipulate capital markets. I think we should be clear on what is happening. Now, what is happening is Stephen Witkoff, who, having participated in two negotiations intended not to reach agreement, but to provide cover for surprise attacks against Iran, has no credibility with Iranians, none whatsoever. And yet he is texting, not speaking to, but texting the Iranian foreign minister and perhaps others. And he's getting back a very firm line, not just the demands by Iran that you mentioned, ending sanctions, removing American bases from the Persian Gulf, ensuring that Israel is in no position to attack Iran again. Nobody's going to take an assurance from Israel on that, because Israel has an almost perfect record of violating any commitment it makes. They're going to have to be weakened sufficiently that Iran is confident that they've learned a lesson and will not attempt another attack. But Iran is also asking for reparations for the damage that has been done to it, which is extensive. And in that connection, I find it very interesting that Iran has proposed, apparently, some kind of regional management of the toll road through the Strait of Hormuz, that is, a cooperative arrangement across both sides of the Persian Gulf, the Arab Gulf states cooperating with Iran in managing this and charging fees for passage through it, rather like the Suez Canal. That could be a source of funding for the reconstruction of Iran, a substitute for reparations, which I'm sure are never going to be granted. But this war is shaping up as something that can only be ended by a humiliation of all or some of the parties. And that is politically very, very difficult. At this point, everyone in the Iranian establishment who might have been willing to make peace on less demanding terms is dead. And therefore, I think Iran is in this until the bitter end. Whether that is true in Israel and the United States is uncertain.
We're approaching our time, Ambassador, so let me ask two questions. You can answer one or both of them, and then I want to give you the final words for our audience. One question is, are you concerned about a movement in Israel to demolish or destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque? That's my first question. And the second question, are you concerned that Israel could use a nuclear weapon against Iran?
So the answer to both questions is yes. And I don't know that I have that much to add at the end. So I'll just say this Israel-Palestine issue, or the issue between Israel and the Arab states, or between Israel and the Muslim world, centers on Al-Aqsa, the rock, the dome of the rock, from which the Holy Quran says Muhammad ascended to the heaven overnight, and it is the third most sacred site in Islam, and a Muslim requirement to make a pilgrimage to it if possible. That is impeded by Israeli occupation. And in fact, Eid al-Fitr, the end of Ramadan, which normally would have been celebrated with worship in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, worship was banned by the Israelis. So what began as a colonization of Palestine by Jewish survivors of the Holocaust and secular nationalists, it's I think Ilan Pappé, an Israeli historian, jokes that the Zionists don't believe in God, but they claim that he promised Palestine to them nonetheless. Anyway, this movement, which was secular nationalist, a classic colonial, anti-colonial struggle, a classic conflict of nationalism, has always had the danger of expanding into a war of religion. And we see this, by the way, in Christian nationalists like our Secretary of Defense, self-styled Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, who is the closest thing to an orc in American politics in terms of ravenous statements of murderous intent toward everyone. But we also see it in the religious Zionist movement, which is now in control of the government in Israel, which espouses the idea of Greater Israel, which I discussed earlier, and which aspires to rebuild the temple that they claim was on the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's not actually archaeological certain, but that's where it was. But in any event, they believe that, and the Christian nationalists believe, that rebuilding the third temple will bring on the end of days. The Christians believe the rapture. Jews believe it will be the second coming of the Messiah, or the coming of the Messiah. Anyway, yes, that is a grave danger. And it is a reminder that the late Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, was also a very noted and widely respected leader of Shia Islam. And his murder has agitated people throughout the entire Muslim world, including in the United States. And we've seen some lone wolf attacks on supporters of Israel as a result. So that is one very grave concern. With regard to the issue of nuclear weapons, yes, Israel has apparently something called the Samson Doctrine. Samson, as you will recall, was a Jew who was imprisoned in the temple of the not sure, I've forgotten my biblical history of basically the Phoenicians, and who, rather than succumb to them, pulled the temple down on them. So this is a metaphor for taking everyone with you as you go. That appears to be Israeli nuclear doctrine. I think Israel made a grave error when it first decided to build a nuclear weapon. Of course, it is not willing to admit that it has done that, but it is widely regarded as having at least 90 nuclear weapons and perhaps more. The reason that I think this is a mistake is Israel is a relatively small country, and 3 nuclear weapons would destroy its entire population. So it isn't wise for a small country with no ability to survive a nuclear attack to provide the basis for being attacked by others who fear its nuclear capabilities. Iran does not have a nuclear weapon yet, but I think it will. And I don't think, by the way, that the prime mover in Prime Minister Netanyahu's 40-year crusade to find an American leader he could cajole or convince to join him in destroying Iran had much to do with Iran's nuclear program. I think it had to do with destroying Iran as an obstacle to the establishment of Greater Israel and Israeli hegemony in West Asia. And as I indicated earlier, I think that attempt is failing badly, and doing so in a way that is very counterproductive for Israel. So I'm sorry for those Israelis who have had to live under the leadership of this man and the fanatic fascists with whom he has surrounded himself.
Just for our audience members, I want to mention that there's an interview of yours, Ambassador Chas Freeman, on the Library of Congress website. It's about 500 pages about your, it's really your story and your career in diplomacy. So I had a ton of questions about that, but we don't have the time for that. Maybe some other day.
So the issues we've been discussing are pretty compelling, and the implications for ordinary Americans as well as non-Americans outside the United States is really very large. That is an oral history that you mentioned, and of course oral histories depend on the interviewer rather than the respondent, because if you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right answers. So it's a little bit skewed, and it is, as you said, very long. I had a very varied career in public service, and I'm happy to say that having left it, I'm no longer penniless, which is one of the prices you pay for serving your country. You don't get rich doing it unless you're Donald Trump and the Trump family. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Ambassador, so much for speaking with me today, especially in the midst of such a busy schedule. You're a very in-demand speaker. Thank you so much for everything you do.
Well, thank you, Amr, and I hope your new venture, this program, is a success. And if I've contributed to that, I'm happy.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
day.
You too.